Uh, so, hello everyone. So, as I'm my director, I'm also happy to welcome all of you. So, yeah, in the first place, of course, very welcome to Rasmus. So, as a monks community and nuns community, a Sangha community, we are also dependent on the lay community, not only for finances, for which we are very grateful, but also for advice. So, Rasmus, thank you so much for accepting this invitation and sharing your knowledge with us. So I also would like to thank everyone who contributes to this event. So of course, Dachin organized everything so fantastically, and then also the translators. I see Ciliana and Teresa. So thank you so much for Italian and Spanish translation. So anyway, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm really looking forward to hear from Rasmus.
Thank you very much, Tender. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It is such an honor to get to spend some hours with all of you. Personally, I met Buddha Dharma some 30-some years ago when I was quite young and traveled to Nepal and ended up in monastery, and that became my life path. And as Detjen said, I've been sitting on the board of FPMT and been teaching around centers in the world, both in the US and Europe and Asia, Australia. And then something happened about almost 20 years ago. I read an article of Lama Yeshe, who talked about what back then was called universal education, the idea of taking Buddha Dharma, take the essence, taking the philosophy, the psychology, the science of the mind, and then applying that to, let's say, the modern world, a different context. And I was completely blown away by that idea. I thought it was genius. And I thought, I want to be part of that. And so I decided at some point to try to bring what I had understood around Buddha Dharma into the world, the modern world. And I thought, I gotta do it well. So I did a year retreat in the Netherlands in a small forest to really contemplate, how can I do this well? And I realized it has to be corporations, because in corporations, there's a lot of power. And I thought, if I can be part of influencing that power for something more positive, that'll be a good thing. I also thought that there's a lot of money, and if I could start to funnel some of that money into better things than just the corporate paying out big bonuses, that could also be a good thing. And then finally, I thought that this could also give livelihood to practitioners of Buddha Dharma that had the, let's say, the understanding experience of talking to a corporate audience. And now today, some 20 years later, and lots of scars on the back, lots of like major failures, I would say it's been successful. We have worked now with more than 1 million people. So people that would never have come to Buddhism, people that would most likely never even meditated. We have helped them to find a path. And we are working with everything from Microsoft and Google to the big pharma companies, the big consulting houses, the big tech firms. So we're really managing to get, let's say, universal education out in corners that it probably wouldn't go elsewhere else. It's been a long journey. It's been very hard, but I can only say that it would not have been possible without the incredible teachers that I have been fortunate enough to meet in my life. And that is, of course, first of all, His Holiness Dalai Lama, that has been supporting me personally and professionally in setting up what we're doing. Secondly, Lama Yeshe, his clarity of vision, just incredible. And thirdly, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, of course, who has been very, very supportive, also providing incredibly helpful advice from the very early days. And then, of course, also the big FPMT community that in so many ways and with so many people and their number of you on this call, and Wendy, I'll just point you out. You were just such a rock in the beginning and so supportive. So thank you for that, and many, many others. So it's been a long journey. It's very successful. It would never have happened without the Buddha, without Dalai Lama, without Lama Zopa, without Lama Yeshe, and of course, without the community of FPMC. So I'm super humble sitting here. The last thing I want to say before just having a bit of a conversation is what I'll be sharing now is the results of a big study that we have done with some leading universities and together with Harvard Business School. And it will be in the context of leadership in corporate, but it's going to be super relevant to being human in samsara, living in communities. Doesn't matter what is the context, honestly. But I'll also say that the insight to what I'll be sharing here actually didn't come through my work with the corporate. It actually didn't come through all the research that is behind it, which I'll share about in a moment. But it actually came through working very, very deeply and closely within FPMT and other spiritual communities. And I'll just bottom line it. I've realized that in spiritual communities, we all have fantastic intentions to do the right thing. And sometimes that intention can be so strong that it actually gets in the way of actually doing the right thing. And I'll come to what I mean with that. But my realization for this work actually came from FPMT and working there. And it's been amazing to see how well it's been received in the corporate world. And it's like one of the most used frameworks in the past 5 years in, let's say, in leadership training around the world. But all of that aside, I'm super, super curious about why did you join this session? And I would actually really appreciate if all of you would type in the chat for 1 minute, why did you join here? And I'm asking that because if I understand why you're here, it's going to be a little easier to, let's say, talk into your reality and to what you're looking for. So if you're game to just write a few minutes or just 1 minute, what made you join today, please do so. And then after that, we'll just do a moment of silence and set a good intention for our time together. But please type. And Tenzing Lengtok, thank you very much to get my unique angle on what promotes harmony in groups. That is a really, really good intention, because I think in most groups there's the intention to have harmony, but how do we do that? And that's where upaya, skillful means, come in, and that's what I'll be talking about, how we do that. And tender hearing ideas about functioning in an organization. Very good. We'll definitely do that. And Anna, I've joined today to find a softer approach when dealing with resolutions and disagreements. Anna, that's great. I'll actually possibly not give you the softer, but probably more on the harder side, because those are often the ones that we are not as good at, but let's see when we get there. And Sensum Palmo to be of more benefit to the small community of nuns, which I'm a co-founder, a coordinator. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get some good insights on that. And Wendy to be inspired by Rasmus and everyone's wisdom and skill. Wonderful. Thank you. And Rachel, because I was invited, I'm curious to how to be a better leader. Good. That's a very good intention. If we are in any kind of leadership position, we better do it well, because we have responsibility there. And Alejandra, hello from Miami Beach. I joined because I spent the past 20 years in the corporate world and I'm interested in compassionate leadership and seen very little of it in my experience. That's true. There could be a need for that. That's why we're doing it, of course. Sensen Pilyang, interface ordained life and lay work life, wonderful. And as director, I'm very often confronted to unpleasant decisions. How to do it, Elizabeth, that is such a good point. As director, I'm very often confronted to unpleasant decisions. What do we do with unpleasant decisions? That's exactly the right question to ask. And that's what we'll be looking at here. Large government agency in Washington, D.C., study Buddhism, interest in leadership approach that I'm going to incorporate into my work. That's a wonderful, wonderful, good. Ordained for 6 years, background in corporates. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, it seems like you all came from the right reasons as far as I can see. So that's good. We're speaking the same language here. Very, very good. So before we start, I think it would be appropriate to just take a moment of settling ourselves so we can engage in this conversation in the most skillful and attentive way. So I'll invite everybody to let go of the keyboards, close your eyes if that's helpful, and just allow ourselves a few moments of letting go of thoughts of where we come from and where we're going to. Letting go of expectations of what may come in this session we have together. And allowing yourself to relax both physically and mentally. And then let's set an intention for the time that we have together today to share and learn so that we can all find ways of living with compassion, leading with compassion, and keeping one mantra in mind, which is doing hard things in a human way. And ultimately, we're doing this so that we can serve ourselves, our communities, and ultimately the world in becoming a kinder, wiser, and happier place to be. And so with that intention, let's reopen our eyes. Wonderful. So let's set a ground rule for the session, which is if I speak too fast, please put it in the chat or just unmute and speak up. Second, if I say something that you disagree with or that you don't understand, put it in the chat or speak up right away. Thirdly, if you have any questions, like just unmute and interrupt me. Let's have this more as a conversation. I will have things to share, but I think it's better if we just have a conversation. How do you feel about those ground rules? Does that sound okay? Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So as my merit is the corporate world, as unexpected as it is, because that's not how I saw myself ending up, the language I have gotten used to speaking is the language of PowerPoints. And So that's what I'll be sharing here, and I do find a bit funny in a total Buddhist context to like teach, but I think PowerPoint is very helpful. So let me pull up a few slides. And here we go. Boom. I'm assuming you can see my slides by now. Yeah, very good. So the topic of the session today is doing hard things in a human way. Why is it called doing hard things in a human way? Because compassion is all about doing hard things in a human way. Compassion, which is often misunderstood as giving people what they want, pleasing them, being nice and sweet, is a big misunderstanding. We know from Buddha Dharma that we need to balance the two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. In life, we need to have skillful means. That means often doing difficult things, and especially when we are engaging with other human beings that may do things that are wrong or doing things that are not good enough, whatever it is our role, and especially if we have a leadership role, to tell them. But this is the same as parents. This is the same with family and friends. Sometimes we have to do hard things with others, giving feedback. And it is very important to do this in a human way, but it is important to do it and then to do it in a human way. And as I shared, there's a lot of research behind this. And especially when working in the corporate world, it's super important to have research. So essentially the frameworks and the things I'll be sharing with you comes from a ton of conversations with executives from very big companies, and a lot of data collection from a lot of leaders and employees, and then with some wonderful academic partners. And while this all sounds wonderful and maybe impressive, remember what I said before. The essence of what I'll be sharing here, I've really learned from FPMT. But if I was to condense the question that we're trying to look at in this session here, is basically, what is it that we are looking for in others? What is that we're looking for in those people that lead us? And what is it we need to bring to bear when we are leading others, whether that is formal or informal? And it is really this thing of doing hard things in a human way, and that requires the two things of wisdom and compassion. And as you see now, when I'll define wisdom, it's slightly different than let's say the traditional Buddhist wisdom, though there are a few elements of it that are important if you dig it a bit deeper. But essentially, when I talk about wisdom here, it is the mental clarity of knowing what is the right thing to do. And then, very important, having the courage to actually do what is the right thing, and the candor to say what must be said. And care, or wisdom, is to have an empathy, which is the understanding of how others feel, and the intention to benefit those that we are with. And compassion, which is the willingness to step into action and actually do something to help others. So this wisdom and care is really important when we're in a leadership position, which all of us are in different constellations. And that means we need to do this difficult thing of both and, being hard and human, having candor with compassion, being confrontational while caring, and driving, let's say, performance and, doing things in life with also empathy. So it is balancing the heart and human, and that is really the secret sauce of good leadership. Because most of us feel that when there is something that we should do, that we either need to be hard and just, you did a shitty job, or be soft and nice and someone that people like. And we don't need to choose either of those extremes. We need to do the middle way, which is bringing it together and doing hard things in a human way. And Sender, I saw you were texting there and you're asking, what is candor? Good question. Candor, yeah, I think that's a very American expression. Candor is when we have the ability to just say what needs to be said. It is the ability of opening our mouth and saying what is difficult to say. Like someone that has said something inappropriate, that didn't do the right thing. Candor is to speak up. By all means, do keep sending questions in the chat or just speak up. So then if these are the two important qualities, then as you can imagine, when working in the corporate space, you need to, of course, have the science. So here comes the science. We did the big study, which basically shows that when you show up with both wisdom and care, you have employees. And for those of you that don't have employees, let's say you have friends, you have family members, you have community members that much more appreciate being with you. And you can see on all the way to the left, the job satisfaction, which can be equated to just the joy of being with you as a community member. If you have high care for others, the experience of others is an average of 37% higher. If you're high on wisdom, so knowing what is the right thing to do with others and having the candor and the courage to say what needs to be said, their enjoyment of being with you is some 38% higher. But if you have the ability of doing both at the same time, you'll see that it is 2.4 that effect. And I know sounds very technical and lots of data, but just what it's basically saying is people that are both good at doing the wise thing and doing it with care really create a much better environment, a much healthier community. So this is the essence of it. So it's all about wisdom and care. And then if we take that and put into a model, it's a 2x2 model, also called a matrix. So this is essentially the matrix of wise compassion. And if we're starting with just understanding the matrix, on the vertical axis, you have care versus not caring. And on the horizontal, you have your wise versus being ignorant. That then gives 4 quadrants. The first one is caring avoidance. We have a lot of care, but because we don't have the wisdom, as in the clarity of doing the right thing or the courage to actually step in and having that difficult conversation, you're in caring avoidance, meaning you're avoiding doing the right thing because of care. Care becomes the barrier to doing the right thing. Let's take an example. Someone in your community is behaving in a way that's not completely appropriate. Whether you're the community leader or not doesn't matter. You should step in and you should say to this person, hey, there's something that's not right here. That's not an unkind thing to do. That is a very kind thing to do, because maybe the person is not aware. And 2, there's probably others that don't appreciate it. And 3rd, the person will never know and therefore not be able to grow if you don't have the courage to actually step in and say it. So this first quadrant, while it is well intended, as the old saying goes, the path to hell is paved with great intentions. So it's noble, but it's not helpful. If we're then looking at the opposite, which is down in 4, we are in uncaring execution. We're putting results before people's well-being. Let's imagine you're part of organizing the great teachings of a wonderful teacher. And it's really important for you that everything is perfect. And therefore you are just steamrolling through, telling people what to do. And you're getting stressed. And therefore you just don't have time or patience for other people that are not doing the right thing. So you just tell them, do this, do that. And it just becomes a very unhealthy, not a very kind, not a very caring, let's say, culture or atmosphere. So it's the exact opposite. You're doing exactly what you should, but you're not doing it in a caring way. In the third one, I think we don't need to talk about it. It's just a really, really terrible place. And unfortunately, there are many leaders that show up in that place. But fortunately, I think few in spiritual communities ever show up in that space, but more in the two others. The reason why we end up in 1 and 4 is that by definition, humans are born altruistic. We want to do good to others, but sometimes we have to do difficult things. And that is painful to us because it's compromising our altruism, our good intentions. So either we don't do it, we stay in 1, or we do it, but we shut off our emotions so we don't get impacted by it, hurting others, and we're down in 4. The middle way, wise compassion, is to go up into 2, where we bring those 2 together, doing hard things in a human way. I'd like to see if there are any questions to the model or comments, and then after that, we'll go into small breakout groups just to discuss, like, how do you see this model? But before we go there, any questions, any comments to this model? And please just unmute. You're also welcome to put it in the chats, but easier if you unmute. Senda, go ahead.
Rasmus, could I ask, what do you mean with hard things, doing hard things in a human way? Is it more internally for someone internally, or hard things, firing, like doing things which are unpopular? Or is it, do you mean more in the person itself?
It could be feedback, it could be firing, it could be restructuring, it could be telling somebody to leave the community. It's doing anything that someone else is not going to be happy with. That's a hard thing.
I wonder if there's a difference between the corporate world and Dharma world. Like our monastery, we cannot send people away or fire people, kind of,
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's difference.
Yeah. So in that case, it is more how you engage in the community. When someone is, as I said, behaving in not the right way, when someone is not being accountable to what's their responsibility, it could be everything from taking the coffee cup in the kitchen and cleaning after them to, acting in any way that's inappropriate. So it is telling people what they need to hear to maintain, let's say, the harmony and health of the community. Any other questions or comments? And something comes up in the chats. Why can't you tell a monastic to leave the community? It is a procedure of the Vinaya to do that. Tender, you want to respond?
Asking someone to leave a monastic, a monk who is living here and who has been accepted as community member in the past, you can only actually send them away after, if someone breaks really the vows. So anyway, and then there's at the end, if people have very, very bad behavior, the director can ask someone, can give a warning, and then there's 3 warnings at the end. And then also the abbot has to be involved. So that's not an easy thing to do.
It is indeed not. Thank you, Sander. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add to what hard means. I think hard it's quite subjective too. I mean, if I'm tired, if I'm stressed, if I haven't had coffee, whatever small thing you ask me might be hard for me in that moment. And I have to find a way to be able to do it. So I think I understand that in the corporate world, hard can be, how do I give someone a performance review? How do I give feedback? But I think if we're honest, even sometimes small daily things can be hard for us, depending on what the conditions are. it's not only the rare extreme circumstances where we find it difficult to do things in a human way sometimes. And I'm thinking broadly of my experiences also in Dharma centers where it wasn't just the extreme difficult things. You know, sometimes the day-to-day stuff can get spicy, you know? So yeah.
It is absolutely true. It is not in the extremes. Yeah, firing or asking someone to leave a community is, of course, an extreme. But here we're talking more about the mundane, day-to-day, basic things of someone not cleaning up after themselves, someone making too much noise, whatever it may be. Wendy, you came on camera. Did you want to say something? No, okay. All right. Then I would like to bring everybody into breakout rooms. And for those of you that have not tried that before, that means in a moment you'll be joining a smaller subset of this group. We'll be 3 to 4 people in each group. And there are 2 questions that I'd like for you to discuss in there. The first one is, when do you find yourself in either quadrant 1 or quadrant 4? Like, when do you find that you're actually behaving in that kind of way where you're avoiding the difficult things, or where you're maybe doing the difficult things, but you're doing it in an uncaring way? So that's the first question. The second question is, in your spiritual community, which of the quadrants most accurately describes the culture of your spiritual community? Which of these 4 quadrants? So those are the 2 questions. Where do you find that you are mostly, and what brings you there? So 1 or 2, or 1 or 4. And then what about your own community? Where is that? And with that, I will then stop sharing, and then I will help you all to get into breakout groups. Where is that? Don't see the function, but I'm sure it's somewhere. Just a second. Maybe this version of Zoom doesn't have it. It looks like it doesn't. Well,
I think you have to be the host. No.
Maybe I need
sure
to
you're
be
the
the host.
host.
I am I'm co-host.
You are the co-host.
That should be
It's-
enough. Dechen, you
Isn't
are
it
the
in the
host,
chat
right?
box?
No, doesn't seem like this Zoom version allows it. Well,
Where would it normally be? I've looked under more, I'm looking under host.
yeah, it should be under more, so it must be this Zoom version that just doesn't allow us to go into breakouts. That's okay. Then let's have the conversation here. So what would you say get you into quadrant 1? When do you go into quadrant 1? Someone unmute or put in the chat, what gets you into quadrant 1 where you're in caring avoidance? You're not doing the difficult thing. You're not having the real conversation.
I think maybe I can start.
Go for it.
Yeah, I've seen this a lot. In some of the monastic communities I've lived in, and I think, I guess personally, I should say, I think I stay in quadrant 1 because I'm afraid either I'm going to get angry or the other person is going to get angry in the difficult conversation that needs to be had. And of course, in a moment of anger, it makes it really hard to live together, you know? It makes it hard to continue like doing the daily stuff you need to do with each other in the future. So for that reason, then there's always kind of an equation. Is like, is it really worth bringing this up, or is it going to cause more harm to our relationship than is worth it, you know, in this circumstance?
Yeah, great. That's a very, very good example. And that equation that you're then asking, or that question, will it cause more harm to our relationship in the long run? And my answer to that is, with my experience in this field, first, it is a matter of how you do it. And if you do it in the right, compassionate, but firm way, it is always better than not doing it, because not doing the right thing, not having the difficult conversations is like a wound that's festering and getting worse and worse and worse over time if it's not addressed. So it is almost always better for the relationship if you bring it out in the right way. We'll get there, how to do it in the right way. Thank you for sharing. Someone else, what gets you into one? What makes you sometimes avoid having the difficult conversations?
I find that if I'm overwhelmed, then I don't have the clarity to understand how to do it or what exactly I should say.
Yeah.
Or
Wonderful, Rachel. Agree.
Or also when I can find the right words, but inside it's not quite right, kind of. It's not very honest.
Yeah.
So then it never comes out right anyway.
Yeah. And what do you mean when it's not really honest? What do you mean with that?
Well, that I say, the words are caring, but inside I'm kind of not caring. I just want the other to change or to do it my way or whatever. That's what I mean. The words don't say that.
Yeah.
But the attitude inside is like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's really important that we as human beings really learn to find that honest inner voice of ours and learn to translate that, because we're easier to be with. And if we think of our most beloved teachers, I think that we can all agree that most of them are actually really authentic in what they say, and they are not like people pleasers. If I'm thinking of at least one of my best role models is Dalai Lama. Like the times I have seen him not scolding others, but being very firm and direct, but always that you're never questioning it as compassion behind it. He's doing it to help that person. It's very firm. It's very authentic, very honest. What else? What gets you into one? Or what does that look like for you?
Hello, Jamian here. I found it many times in the community when we live together and somebody has some kind of position to make, let's say, some kind of authority. It's difficult to make a decision with people who you consider your friends. And then it's more difficult to make harder decision, let's say harder decision, because you want to keep the relationship.
Exactly.
But for one point, we need to be impersonal because our position mandates that.
Yeah.
And somehow, from the other point of view, from the other person, they want to keep the close relationship.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I see people nodding. I think we can all recognize that. Let me ask a question to everybody who have had the experience in life at some point where a friend of yours told you something about you that in the moment made you angry, upset. You did not like to hear that, but a few minutes, hours, weeks, years later, you actually realize that that was very helpful for you. If you've had that experience, put your hand up. Yeah. Almost all of us have had that experience. And if we're thinking about that and taking that as an example, as a role model of we need to speak up. We need to speak up, even if it's a friend, even if we are afraid of hurting or harming the relationship. It's so important to speak up because it helps others. So Lamo, did you unmute to say something?
No, I made a mistake.
That's okay. We all make mistakes. Lucia, you put your hand up. Lucia, did you put your hand up? Or was that just, that was artificial intelligence that made you put your hand up? Very good. Okay, there are some, did anybody else want to say something?
There are some comments in the chat, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'll go to those. Yeah. So Anilosang is saying, when you know that the other one will be hurt and will not see my point. That one, there's two parts of it. One thing is that the other one will be hurt. I would say it is not a problem to hurt other people, because sometimes we need to be hurt to see the truth. So that shouldn't be a problem. Then it's a matter of doing it the right way. But the other part, if they will not see the point, that is more tricky, because then they'll just be hurt and they will not see the point. And that is where it requires really skillful means, upaya. So let's get to that a little later. How do we do that? And I'm not sure I'm saying the word correctly pronounced right, but Sechi? Sorry if I didn't say that right. Sesi? Thank you very much. The closer people are for me, the harder it seems to have the difficult conversations, such as family. Exactly, that is such a good point. For some reason, family and close friends is really difficult, but those that are closest to us, for those of us that have children, and I have 3 of them and are all adults, it's interesting. I have no problem telling them. So there's also something around power dynamics and something, but like my mom, would I ever tell her off? Absolutely, that would be difficult. All right, and Wendy is saying, not wanting to cause a fuss, hurt someone's feeling, or embarrass them. That's exactly right. There's often that concern, of course, about how it'll be perceived by others. And Elizabeth is saying, holding grudge with capitals. Elizabeth, would you be okay to elaborate, like share a bit more what you mean? If it's okay to ask you, and otherwise, no worries. All right. Oh.
Yes, Rinpoche says always that holding grudge comes from anger, you know, and it's a very difficult factor to eliminate whenever you are in a situation to you have to say something to somebody. As director, you know, very often I am in the situation and I still have this grudge, you know, and this pervade whatever I say, you know, whatever I say, I have this grudge. And so I'm not saying the right things because I have this grudge.
Yeah. Wonderful. I love that. Thank you.
And also I would like to say something else. I think as Westerners, living in community isn't an easy thing. When you look at Asian community, how disciplined they are, and because we come from different background, you know, so Western community is very difficult, I think.
That is very, very true. That is very true for many, many different cultural, historical reasons. Definitely, yeah. And then Pingo says something really interesting. I really appreciate this one. Quadrant 1 is when the heart overrules the brain. Clever statement, we'll come to that. And then contaminated love or obsessive love when one cares for oneself more than others. Now, this sounds incredibly hard and maybe even judgmental, but it is not. That comes from deep wisdom. Essentially, when we are in quadrant 1, it is often the ego that rules. The ego that wants to make sure that others don't dislike us because we want to be liked. All of us do. So I think there's some hard truth in this one. Pingo, anything you wanna add to that?
Yeah, I think mothers sometimes have this caring, avoiding action because mothers are supposed to be selfless, but many mothers, including Asian mothers, have the selfish gain that the children will love them more than they actually show the love. So sometimes mothers do not show love too much, but pampered the child, or because there's problems living together nowadays. Not only Westerners. I think sometimes we see from the outside Asian monastic or even lay people are harmonious, but they are very good at hiding. They want to show, we call face, the Asian face, very important to take care. So actually, human beings have the same problem. Living together too long.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think one thing very important to say is now we are talking about why do we get into quadrant 1 and what are the flaws, like what's wrong with us. But I think it's really, really, really important not to judge ourselves. We are all, at least I can talk for myself here, deeply immersed in samsara, meaning I'm not enlightened, I'm not even liberated. I am so far from. I am bound to be imperfect and make mistakes. And I'm okay with that. I'm not going to judge myself. And it's really important not to judge yourself for that. If you do that, it's just going to get worse. And then another comment from Vetok saying, sometimes it might be a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of compassion. And that is exactly right. We'll come to that in a moment. And Anna is saying, as has been mentioned, when the other is unable to receive or understand in a safe way. And that is exactly right. It is so important to create the safe container, the safe culture, the feeling that others feel safe, even when you give them feedback, even when you're doing these difficult things. Very, very important. And we'll come to that in a moment as well. And Tenzin Palmo is saying, lack of confidence in my assessment of the situation. What if it's just my own impression that is urgent enough to require my intervention? That's a good one. If we're not sure, yeah, maybe we need to wait a bit. But let it never be an excuse to not do what needs to be done when you actually know that it's the right thing. All right. Then what about quadrant 4? When do you sometimes end in quadrant 4? Remember, that's when you have like wisdom, courage, clarity, just doing those difficult things, but without care. What gets you into that space? And Venerable Detchen mentioned when you haven't slept enough, when you're tired, when you haven't had your coffee, our compassion can drop. That is so true. Nana is writing, being afraid of losing good reputation of myself, therefore concealing things. Yeah. And Rachel, also when the other is already very angry. Yeah, exactly. Then we can get angry and then just becomes a confrontation. Super unhelpful. And Sitchi is saying, rush, too bad. Exactly. When you have to achieve a goal set in short time, yeah, it's often when we feel under pressure for getting something done that is important for us. And again, it can also be the ego that creeps in there. I need to make sure that we achieve this, otherwise I will not look good, or my teacher will not look well at me, or whatever it may be. And then we end up being bossy in a negative way. All right. So,
can I mention something?
Yes, go ahead, please.
My observation, especially Dharma Center. Let's say not really directors, but managers overburdened with jobs. And then they want to do many things because of merits, many people help and blah, 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 blah. But then first thing that it gets cut off is the work on relationships and caring about people. This is first thing that goes off, because it becomes just goal-oriented.
Yeah.
Let's do.
Yeah.
And first thing is relationships, and always the relationships they get damaged. Always.
Yeah.
Always.
That's exactly right. And then we focus on the results rather than the relationship. Yeah, that's so true. And Wendy put it also in a very, very clear way and very much along the same lines, when I'm super convinced that I'm right and the others are definitely wrong. Yeah. And Ben is saying quadrant 4, when I'm dealing with very difficult people, easier to be less compassionate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then the good question is, what makes these people difficult? Long conversation. Let's not go there now, but maybe there's something we need to look at. And Anna is saying lack of patience and compassion and awareness. Yeah. Very good. Then let's just have the last question, which is, in your experience, spiritual communities, spiritual cultures, spiritual organizations, in which of these quadrants would you generally find that these communities are operating? And please put it in the chat, and it could be 1, 2, 4, 3, it could be 1 and 2, whatever comes up for you. Spiritual communities, which quadrant is that generally? And I know it's a terrible thing to generalize, but just to get a sense of it here. Annie Losang is saying 1. Sensin Priyang is saying 1. Go is saying 1. More ones. General impression in spiritual communities 10 to 1. Yeah. Very good. And personally, having been deeply involved with a number of spiritual communities, both many different study groups and centers within FPMT, also FPMT globally, but also other spiritual communities like Tsergar Mingyur Rinpoche's organization that I'm also at the board of. Definitely 1 is the general one. And then there's also a 2 and 4 and a 4 and a 2 here. So also some other views there. That's good. I think when I've been working in corporate for the past many years, the definite expectation I would have would be that corporates are generally operating in 4 because it's all about results and so on, but that is actually not the case. And I've been very surprised to see that there are of leaders assessed by the employees, some 20% that say that the leader is operating in quadrant 2, so wise compassion. Then there's around 20% that say that the leader operates from 4. I would have thought that would have been much higher. And then some 60% that say that the leaders operate from 1. And this to me just goes to show again, humans are born altruistic. We want to do good to others. We want to be good to others. But in communities and certainly in companies, we are sharpening the diamonds of our Buddha nature by rubbing each other's feathers, by annoying each other by the diversity of thought and actions. And thereby we bring up conflicts that we need to deal with, but we don't want to deal with it because it feels like it's against our altruistic nature. So we end up in 1. So the big question then is, how can we be better at avoiding being in quadrant 1? And to answer that question, we need to look at the difference between empathy and compassion. And I'm sure as the good Buddhist you are, you probably know both the neuroscience and the psychology and the Buddhist understanding of the difference between the two. But in case you don't, I'll just give you a super short crash course in the difference between empathy and compassion. And then I'll guide a little visualization to help you to experience the difference in case you haven't already. So we'll just go back to the slides and then I will show what I call the landscape of compassion. This is the results of reflecting on this a lot and doing a ton of interviews. So I can't accredit any other researcher to this little model here, but I've talked a lot to Matthew Ricard, who's of course both a scholar, a real yogi, and also a bit of a researcher. So in this model here, you have on one hand the willingness to go into action for somebody who's suffering. Imagine you see someone who suffers. On this vertical, you have the willingness to go into action, and on the horizontal, the understanding of the other person's experience. Down at the bottom here, we have pity. I feel sorry for you. But when we are in pity, we have very low willingness to action and very little understanding. Pity is often something we feel when on the news we see that there's a flooding or some other catastrophe happening somewhere far away, people that we don't know. as good Buddhists, we should have the same experience there as if it was our own child or mother, but we don't. We just have pity. That's very normal. If we take one step up the ladder, we come to sympathy. I feel for you. I don't feel that much, and I'm probably not willing to go into much action for it. But if we take one step further up, we come into empathy, which is this incredible human feature to be able to feel what another person is feeling. And if we're just like neurologically, what is happening there? The part of our brain that has what is called mirror neurons is seeing through our eyes the facial expression of another person that we care for. We see their suffering. The mirror neurons mirror that experience, and then we feel it as well. It's incredible. Empathy was released or was developed in humans when we moved away from being hunter-gatherers and started to live in flocks that had to operate well as a community. And the only way that that was possible is if we could stick together, and we could only stick together if we could actually feel what others felt. So it was an incredible evolution of the human brain to feel empathy. And it's one of the most incredible forces of us as humans. But when it comes to being in harmonious communities, societies, organizations, it's really important that we are not run by empathy, but that we manage to take the further step of this ladder, which is compassion. Compassion is the intent. I'm here to help you. And the very simple mantra here is empathy plus action equals compassion. Empathy plus action equals compassion. So the very simple statement here is we need to connect with empathy, but we need to lead with compassion, as in how we engage with others. And so just to understand the difference between the two, empathy is when we share the suffering of someone else. Compassion is when we have the intention to alleviate. So empathy essentially is an emotion, and compassion is an intention. Very different things. And if you think Rasmus is just juggling with words, but it's the same thing, no. Neurologically, they show up in very different parts of the brain. Empathy in very older parts of the brain, compassion in much more recent parts of the brain. And what research has found is that when we are leading with empathy, as in when we are trying to engage with others and leading them, impacting them with empathy, we can get more distress and burnout. Our actions can be more fleeting, as in short-lived. There's a lack of diversity because we empathize with those that are close to us and that look like ourselves. We can become more narrow-mindedness, and we can even make more poor moral decisions. So as important as empathy is, we cannot manage our engagement with others only on that. We need to move into compassion. And what we see the impacts of compassion is a sense of empowerment for ourselves and those that we're with, a sense of control, much more sustainable, long-lived action, more social connection between us, and general happiness both for ourselves and for others. So we need to relate to others and connect with empathy, but then move into compassion. I'd like to guide a little visualization, but just before I do that, any questions to what I just shared? Or any problems? Do you disagree? Sender.
To say a little bit more about people who get burned out.
Yeah.
What is actually happening is,
yeah.
What gets stuck, or what does people break down?
Yeah. I'll take an example that many can relate to. In pandemic, many people were suffering tremendously for so many reasons, the worries, the loneliness, whatever. If we are engaging with all the people we engage with, and there's a lot of suffering there, and empathy is to take on the emotion, the pain, the suffering of others. And if we do that repeatedly with many people, we start to experience a lot of suffering, and therefore can risk burnout. If you are a leader in a community where there's upheaval, challenges, conflicts, and you're taking a lot of that on yourself as the leader of the community or as a leader in the community, you're taking on a lot of stress, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and therefore you risk the burnout. Sender, did that answer the question?
How to avoid that?
We'll get there in a moment. How to avoid that? Exactly, good question. We will definitely get there. All right, so how to get there and experience the difference is what we'll do now. So we'll spend some 5 minutes in a little simple visualization now. So I'll invite all of you to let go of everything we have discussed in the past hour. Close your eyes. And then allow yourself to relax physically. Allow your mind to settle down a bit. Take a few moments of just noticing your in-breath and your out-breath. And then the first part of the visualization is to think of a person that is very dear to you, that in recent times has experienced some kind of suffering, whether it was mental, emotional, physical. Take a moment to bring this person to mind. And just recall for yourself, what was it that they experienced? What was going on? And if possible, even imagine them in front of you right now, as if you're sitting and looking at them. Notice what their eyes express. Notice what their face expresses. Does the suffering come up in any way? Or in their body language, how do you see the suffering in their eyes, in their face, in their body? And really just allow yourself to take it all in. It's a person you really care for. They are suffering or have just been suffering. Really take it in. And then take a moment to check, how do you feel right now? And if you're feeling a little sad, feeling a bit depressed, a little unhappy, this is the experience of empathy. You're literally taking on the pain of somebody else. And it is very noble and beautiful and incredible that we can do this. If you don't feel that right now, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that this is a very short little exercise. But now let's take a step away from empathy and into compassion. And I'll invite you to do that by almost taking a few steps away from this person, bringing a little bit of rational perspective to this person, and asking yourself the very rational question, what does this person need? What is one or two even tiniest things that I can do to bring a little bit of light to their day? And then now actually make a commitment that within the next 2 days, you will do one or two of these things. So commit to do even the smallest thing that might help this person. And then take a moment to reflect that this person is suffering. That's their karma. There's nothing you can do to take their karma away. But you do have the karma to be close to them and to impact them in positive ways, and you have just committed to do that. So while you can't take their suffering away, at least you can help. And you have committed to doing that, so that's a wonderful thing. And then now check up, how do you feel? And if you feel a bit lighter, maybe even a bit uplifted or happy, this is the experience of compassion. Just sit with that for a few moments. And then in your own pace, you can let go of the whole exercise and gently return back to the Zoom room. So thank you for engaging in this little exercise. I'm curious, did anybody manage to feel a shift in your experience of those two scenarios? And if so, would you be willing to unmute and share your experience?
Hi everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I found quite an instant shift from the empathy side to the compassion, as the empathy brought more anger to a particular situation I was thinking of, because it was more to do with me, and I couldn't get out of that personability of it all. But with compassion, okay, let's not go in all gung ho, which can be my route, and let's just look at, what's best. It might not be best sitting there and saying, oh yeah, that's so bad, let's do this. It might be about how can they change, their relationship to anger or whatever. But definitely quite a substantial shift from empathy to compassion. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Anna. Anyone else that managed to feel some kind of shift?
Maybe I'll share a thing here.
Go ahead.
My father has recently get a stroke, so sterilized. bedridden. So when I bring him into my mind, initially with empathy, I feel his suffering and physical, certain mental suffering. Then when it comes to compassion, I did whatever I can for purification of negative action, of some Vajrasattva practice and frustration. And each time I do that, I have suddenly felt that being a child to my father, whatever I did will certainly benefit him. That give me more energy and more, much more enthusiasm to do all this purification practice and dedicate to him.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Anyone else that'd like to share anything? All right. So then let's just look at, in simple terms, how do we apply this thing of connecting with empathy, but then engaging through compassion. So I'll just show that in like a flow diagram, just to try to spell out how do we do this in real life, Sender, to answer your question. So imagine you see someone who is suffering or experiencing challenges. What, as I mentioned, happens naturally for most of us is that there's that spark good human beings is that we get stuck in this emotional empathy, this emotion of feeling what they're feeling. And because it feels right, because we want to be there with them, we can easily get into this empathetic trap, or empathetic hijack as it's called. And then if we do this repeatedly, we can suffer from empathetic burnout. Now we need to learn to shortcut this so that when we see a person that's suffering, we feel what they feel for a moment, but then rather than staying in or diving deeper in the emotion, we move into, let's say, rational or wise empathy, which is to ask yourself, what can I do to help? Like practically, what can I do to help? Which is compassion, that intention to be of benefit, and then you go into action. Now, one thing that's really important here is that we don't shortcut the moment of empathy, because we probably all know the experience of feeling bad about something. Someone that we care for comes in and they immediately start to give you advice on how you should deal with it. And it is so not helpful, because we need to know that they know how we feel before we are ready to receive their advice. So it's very important, before you go into solutions mode, just have that moment of just simply sitting with people, look them in the eye, make sure that they know that you know what they feel. That is like opening up their heart, and then you can start to have the conversation. Any comments or questions on this one?
I think that it's a very difficult balance, because in if my mind is very quick to go very, very deep in empathy, and I'm training myself to come out of that without getting too far into the burnout. Then to also balance that with the patience of being in that empathy, so the other person can see that I'm there. I think that this becomes a big challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. And like any other mental, emotional challenge, good thing about Buddhism, we know it can be trained. The more we do it, the better we become, the more we familiarize, the more it becomes nature. Thank you for sharing.
So if we cannot help, if we feel the compassion but we can't help,
can't we always help? Like even just sitting and listening, or just sharing, eye contact, or getting flowers, or getting a cup of tea, whatever, just simply being there. It may not take their pain away, but at least we're there with them. Elizabeth, do you have an example of where you feel it's just not possible to help?
oh, yes, watching TV, with all the wars, or when you give, I live in a big city,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of beggars, so
yeah,
I'm always happy to give some money, I prepare some
yeah,
cash,
yeah,
and it's every day,
yeah,
but I know I cannot do more.
yeah,
I feel sorry for them, but
yeah,
I know I cannot do more
yeah,
because it might be dangerous for me, or
yeah,
something like this.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say in that case, because obviously you can't like give food to all the homeless or shelter. You just cannot. Or all the animals that we see that are suffering, we just can't.
Mm.
Then we have the choice, do we either get stuck in empathy, or do we make Tonglen the practice that's riding our breath day and night, or at least when we're walking through the streets? At least for us, it's easier. And I believe that we will also show up in a way for them that is much more caring rather than just suffering with them, which I think is better for them. So I think we always have a choice. It may not always feel like that, but we do. All right. I'd like to get to the last point, which is bringing all of this together. How do we show up with wise compassion for people when we need to do hard things in a human way? And so we'll just go back to the slides, back to this model. How do we get into that second quadrant? And for this, I interviewed many of the teachers that I've been studying with for many years. I've been, of course, studying Buddhism for many, many, many years. So I brought that, and then talking to a lot of people that have a lot of experience with doing a lot of difficult things, but in a human way. And here I'm actually talking about the hundreds of corporate leaders that I've met over the years that I've really respected for having big hearts, but also the ability of really doing difficult things. And in my experience, they can be masterful in exactly this. Just like the example of Dalai Lama, who is the most caring, compassionate person on the planet, but at the same time does not flinch for doing really difficult things. So what came out of all of these interviews is this following simple model. We call it the wise compassion flywheel. Flywheel is this concept of a wheel that when you spin it once, it starts to spin faster. And when you spin it twice, so basically, the more you do this, the easier it becomes. And there were 4 behaviors that stand out of these people that really are good at doing hard things in a human way. The first one is caring presence. Caring presence, not distracted, not thinking of other things. I'll come back to it in a moment, like in a little more detail. I'll give some very practical tips for this. The mantra here is, when you are doing difficult things with someone, be here now. The second one is caring courage, because doing difficult things, doing hard things require us to get out of our comfort zone, out of the fear of offending or upsetting others. It takes caring courage. And the mantra here is courage over comfort. If we want to grow and if we want others to grow, we need to bring ourselves and them out of the comfort zone. The third step is, when we have developed caring presence, caring courage, then we need caring candor. And again, remember, candor is to say what needs to be said. And the mantra here is direct is faster. I'll come back to that. Direct is faster. And then finally, caring transparency, because creating clarity is kindness. And what our study found was that when we embrace these 4 behaviors, we create trust, psychological safety, and thereby unleash, here it says performance, that's in a corporate context. In a Buddhist, in a spiritual community, that means harmony. So if we just take them one by one, caring presence is the ability of really being here now. So that means when you're going to have a difficult conversation, whoever it is, whatever it is, make sure your phone is left out the room, make sure you're really there. And 3 really practical tips is use the power of the pause. Don't just rush into the conversation, but start the conversation with 1 minute of mindfulness. Whether you do that alone before the conversation or you even do it together. In my company and my organization, we have this rule that any conversation starts with 1 minute pause. We always just sit for 1 minute because it's much easier to be present with each other. Secondly, in all conversations, whoever you're with, and especially when it's a difficult conversation, have the intention to benefit. We know Dalai Lama, when he's asked, what is Buddhism? And he says, help others. If you can't help others, at least don't harm them. So that intention of benefiting them is at the core of Buddha Dharma. So always ask yourself the question, how can I benefit this person? And yeah, it may be doing a nice thing like giving them a compliment or giving them a cup of coffee, but it could also be that the kind thing is to tell them something that they did not expect, something that is not nice or easy to hear, but they need to hear it. And thirdly, be curious and don't ask assumptions. So come into these meetings with a lot of curiosity, openness. The second step is when we have established that presence, we need to have courage. Courage over comfort. Our egos love comfort. It is very nice to be in the safe, warm embrace of the comfort zone, and the ego is not under pressure. But if we want to grow and we want to grow others and we want to create harmony, we need to get out of the comfort zone sometimes. And 3 simple tips. First of all, remember that comfort and growth cannot go together. Either you're in comfort and nobody grows, or you get out of comfort and you can help each other grow so that there's more harmony. I'm personally a very conflict avoidant person. I never liked to have conflicts or difficult conversations. And so I made this rule for myself that every day I need to have a difficult conversation with someone. And I have to say it has been one of the most liberating practices, like literally liberating practices. It feels like it is absolute lojong. It is mind training, going to those difficult places, embracing them and learning from them. Secondly, avoiding the empathy trap. So whenever we feel that we are hijacked by someone's emotions, breathe, check how we feel, release, and go into compassion. And then get peer support if you're going to have a difficult conversation. Talk to one of your good friends, talk to a family member, a community member, share what are your fears and what are the worries you have. This always helps. Thirdly, caring candor. The mantra is direct is faster. Why is direct faster? It is because many of us have the tendency that when we're going to have a difficult conversation to reestablish harmony, we sugarcoat it, we sandwich it. We go into a conversation, we've been setting it up and we're having to share these difficult things. And then we end up talking about the weather or telling them that their hair look nice or whatever. But it is generally not very helpful. The other person intuitively knows that something is coming. So you better say it right away, or at least as soon as possible. In some cultures, you need to wait a little longer, but generally say things as fast as you can. Don't beat around the bush. Say what needs to be said. that leaves time to have a conversation, to connect, and so on. And then finally, avoid the popularity game. All humans want to be popular. We like to be liked. Take a stance and do the right thing. And then lastly, caring transparency, because clarity is kindness. So when you have a difficult conversation, don't pretend to be the expert or the authority that have all the answers, but say that you're going to figure out and then we'll learn together. And treat people as adults. If someone has something difficult to share with you, you want them to share that, right? So share as much as possible so they know where they stand and where you stand, and then you can move on from there. And then finally make the invisible visible. Rather talk more than less. And when we manage these 4 behaviors, we really create much more harmonious, productive, healthy, Dharma-like communities. But it's not easy. It is not easy. When I started Potential Projects many years ago, as I mentioned, I was very conflict avoidant. And I have to say, the one thing that has helped me to establish a very healthy, harmonious work environment for hundreds of people is my ability of practicing exactly this. Everybody know where I stand and everybody know where they stand. I don't hold it back. And that creates that sense of safety where people dare to speak up. And that to me is a really compassionate culture, because that means nobody have to hide, nobody have to not feel cared for, and nobody have to fear that what should be said is not being said. So doing hard things in a human way with wise compassion is the middle way, and a very skillful thing to do for spiritual communities as well. Any questions? Any comments? Rachel, go ahead.
When we're not in a structure that has, I'm the leader and you're following me, or I have some responsibility directly for you.
Yeah.
And yet we honestly think something is not right, but the other person isn't willing to hear that. This model is more for someone who's in a leadership position, who has that kind of responsibility and duty and structure around that, when it's more of an equal or
a peer.
How does this translate into a less hierarchical structure?
To me, it's the exact same thing, whether there's a hierarchy or not. These are basic human principles, human behaviors. It doesn't matter if they're hierarchy or not. In our work in hierarchies, this goes for when you're giving feedback downwards, but also giving feedback upwards or in parallel. Same thing. It's about human, helpful behavior.
And when somebody really is not hearing or understanding or accepting that, it doesn't matter from the point of view of the person giving.
If people don't hear it or don't accept, there's nothing we can do. So see it as dewdrops, as rainbows. It's empty. As long as you're not holding on to it, it's not a real big problem. Or at least you don't solidify and make it more difficult.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then maybe as we're coming to the end of the time, let me say, this is very helpful, very practical. Thousands of people are applying it, hundreds of thousands. What is more important is that we are training our compassion and our, let's say, understanding of understanding of wisdom, like real emptiness, because the moment we do that, everything else falls much easier into place.
Rasmus, can I ask, does the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4 go that way, or you can actually go to some number?
Yeah, it generally goes in that way. Generally goes that way.
If the person we are talking to has so much fear, even unfounded fear, uncertainty, we can't proceed to say what we like. How to proceed?
Yeah. Then we need to dial up the care. You said they say caring presence, caring courage, caring candor, caring transparency. So really emphasizing the care so that they know that this is coming from the right place. There's a big difference from giving feedback from a place of, I want you to change, and I want you to change because that will help you. So that caring, its intention is really, really important. And it's felt. Yeah, and that starts with us. Like, what is the intention we're coming with? If it's compassion, then it's not about us. It's not what we want from them. It is what we hope for them.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Any other comments or questions? Well, then thank you, everybody. Such a pleasure to spend part of the Sunday with you all. I really appreciate you joining. Unfortunately, I don't have time enough in these communities anymore. So I really enjoy when I have the opportunity to, and looking forward to returning all of my time to this in a few years when I'll let go of the work I do now and come back and just lead retreats with Buddhist communities, which is more fun. So looking forward to reunite at that point. But thank you so much for interest, attention, and for the presence. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rasmus. Thank you so much. You're a very good time manager because you really kept it in 1.5 hours. And as you say, like, yeah, you're very busy now and you have a very intensive life. So, but then indeed, if you have in the future time, I hope as community we can repay your kindness. Yeah. And as I still have a kind of question like how can we support each other a little bit more in this, you know? So, yeah, maybe I can ask you maybe in a private email how we can approach this support of each other with difficult conflicts and difficult challenges. Thank you so much. Yeah, and. Also, thank you very much, everyone who is present. Thank you so much for asking questions and sharing. So, Dechen, do you still want to say something to conclude?
Just thank you very much to Rasmus, to everyone, and thank you so much also to the translators for making themselves available for this so that we can share this. It's been a really wonderful meeting. And Rasmus, I heard what you said at the end, so don't worry, we will find opportunities for you. This is just the start. So yeah, thank you to everyone. Thank you so much.
Should we just finalize by dedicating the merits of this session to the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama, the quick rebirth of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the long life of all other wonderful teachers in all traditions, all religions, and to the vast progress on the path and enlightenment of all human beings and sentient beings, that we may all achieve full enlightenment and benefit each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Ciao. Ciao, ciao.